Hello and welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraphin. For the next half hour, we're going to be talking about sound, and hopefully we'll all have an experience of how archetypal sounds can affect us. Our guest is Marrion Kobalinski. Marrion is from London, England, where she studied at an esoteric school for many years, focusing on the healing qualities of sound. Welcome to Infinity, and tell us, what is sound?
Sound, it's what we're made of. We're actually made of sound. Everything vibrates and is actually made of sound, so that if you listen carefully enough to absolutely anything, you could hear it.
If you took the sound away, would we cease to exist?
Absolutely. Take away the word and there's nothing. Because in the beginning was the word. We came out of the word. And the word comes first. Everybody thinks that things are somehow that they're the more real thing, but actually what's more real is the name which comes behind. It must be. The name comes first, and then whatever creature is to be created appears.
What about when we find things for which we have no name at the time that we find them? They, in the conventional way of thinking, exist before we give them a name. If it's
yes, but we didn't create them, did we?
No, we didn't.
To be created, they have to have a name.
So they already had a name.
For us to know them, we have to know their name.
Mm-hmm.
And most names we don't know.
Do we ascribe incorrect names to many things in our world?
Yes, I'm sure we do. Because otherwise we'd all speak the same language. And I'm sure we began. There is a universal language, which we all know, but we've forgotten. We're just clothed in a cloud of unknowing, which descends very soon after we're born, if not before.
If you were to tell me the story of creation, where would you put sound in that story? I'm a child, and you're the adult, and you're going to tell me the story of creation.
Well, God speaks, and the beginning begins. I think probably, as I've told it to many children, they find it absolutely fascinating just simply to hear the Genesis version of creation, which you can find in every scripture, slightly differently, but it always begins with the word. Darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
It's been said that the sound from the Big Bang, in the theory of the universe of the Big Bang, that the explosion created our universe, and that sound is still echoing through the cosmos, and that it holds more energy than we can ever imagine. What do you think of that?
I'm sure that's true. And that Big Bang, the sound is simply that word, which we have a faint reflection of as being Om. And it can be heard. Well, it can be heard. We can hear that reflection when we speak it, and that brings us a little bit nearer actually hearing it. I haven't heard it, but it's said to be sounding all the time. And if it wasn't sounding, as you said before, everything would just disintegrate. We come out of Om, and we return to Om.
Is there a difference between the human voice and God's voice?
Well, no, not really. But yes. Because, well, if you think about human sound, the sound that comes out of us, of course it's the sound of you or me or any individual. And of course it's the sound of their family. It's the sound of their nation. It's the sound of their continent. It's the sound of humanity. But it's ultimately, or at the very beginning, it's the sound of God.
Is that the uniqueness of the sound of the human voice? We're surrounded by all sorts of sounds, natural sounds, animal sounds, the sounds of technology, and honking of horns, and the rumble of trains. What is it that's unique about the sound of the human voice?
It's just the nearest reflection of the divine. It can be so refined that it can take you straight back to the divine. It can take you back to yourself, to your very true self, yourself with a capital S. You can hear, if you listen to anything, you can hear the music in it. And you can hear everything is the same substance. We're all made out of one substance, so we all echo one sound, but we all vibrate in different ways, and the human vibration is very, 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 very fine. And if you listen to the highest in whoever you're speaking to, or whoever you're listening to, that seems to raise their sound.
Is there a difference that we can explain between the spoken voice, human voice, and when an individual sings?
Well, do you know, I really think that we used to just always sing. We didn't talk, we sang. Like we didn't walk, we danced. And so, yes, of course there is a difference. And I think when people sing, it can take you closer. It always does, because it's always a more universal sound, as long as people don't make it artificial.
How does sound have that impact on us? How does it work? We can see sound in the sense that we can now put it into a machine that will show us the decibel level, or we can follow sound patterns through high technology. What's happening on the receiving end? What makes it affect us?
Well, every sound affects every single cell of the body. So it just does affect us. I don't know what makes it, it just does. And so the purer the sound, the better for us it is.
Would you say that the language that we speak and the sounds that we make us who we are?
Yes, and they tell other people who we are. Absolutely. They do both. They do both. Because we're receiving and giving sound all the time. And in fact, the sound we make creates the person we are, as well as the sounds we hear.
The differences between you and I would be easy in that sense, because while we both speak the same generic language, we're speaking English. The way that you speak English is different than the way that most Americans speak English, and so there are subtle differences there.
Yes.
Well, what about when we learn another language, and you learn to speak Cantonese, and I learn to speak Hebrew?
Yes.
Does that change who we are?
Well, yes. I mean, even if you just change a dialect, doesn't your whole body feel different? I know mine does. And if I just take on any other dialect, my whole body feels different. And it's the stance is different. And the thoughts are different. The reactions are different. If you take on the sound of somebody else, and you can, it's easy to do that, then you take on everything about them, more than in any other way.
Have we elevated equipment and machinery to a higher level when we do that? We now have sound recording and reproduction equipment, and we have computers that can in fact speak to us. Some of them sound a little stiff, but some of them, I imagine, are really getting quite smooth in their reproduction of the human voice.
It doesn't do the same to you as a real live voice. Because when someone's speaking to you, they're transmitting life to you. they're actually giving you a substance, and they're changing your substance. And if there's life in the voice, then some of that life is given to the person who's receiving it, who's listening to it. And if it's dead or mechanical, it doesn't do so much to you.
Does that suggest that the recording of sound, particularly the human voice, can give us immortality?
No.
Our conversation today, for example, will exist for, theoretically, hundreds of thousands of years because it's being recorded. Can we live on through our voice?
Well, not in that way, I don't think, but certainly in the way that whenever you speak, whatever word is spoken, that sounds on into infinity. So it's very important what sounds we make. But I don't know about bits of tape. I'm sure they get destroyed, they disintegrate. But actually sound itself doesn't, which is a very sobering thought.
The sounds that we're speaking are not only captured then by the recording equipment and the tape, but you're suggesting that the sounds go into the universe in which we live and continue to echo around once they've been spoken?
I'm absolutely sure they do. Absolutely sure. And so, I mean, if there are bad recordings and things are repeated over and over again, which are unhelpful to the aspiring human soul, then it's a great responsibility for whoever spoke it, or, well, I don't know whose responsibility it is, but certainly once you become aware of sound, you take on a great deal of responsibility for the whole planet, for the universe.
You work a lot with vowel sounds.
Yes.
Why?
Well, because the vowel sounds are the sounds which sound. You can't say anything without saying a vowel sound. The consonants simply sound with consonant, means to sound with, but the vowels always sound. In fact, the Sanskrit word for vowel is swara, which means that which shines by itself like the sun. And no word can be heard without the vowel being spoken. It just can't. You can't pronounce a consonant. It's just, for instance, it doesn't come out. It is not actually vocalized unless you've got an R or an U or a ka, ku, ke, kai, something with it, a vowel with it. The vowel is the substance and the light.
Sanskrit is considered to be the most ancient language. How are the Sanskrit vowels different from the vowels that we use today?
They're just simply pure. And there isn't anybody who can't pronounce them. And they don't change. And they sound, just to call them Sanskrit, they are Sanskrit, but they're just universal sounds. Every child, everywhere, pronounces these sounds in exactly the same order. And then they learn the vernacular. Whatever their parents speak, they imitate, or whatever is spoken around them, they imitate. So they drop a few, change a few, cloud up a few. But they're just simply universal sounds. So they aren't different. You hear them all the time. But you do hear them muddied and distorted.
How do we know what the sound of Sanskrit is? It's such an ancient language. Is it preserved in an oral tradition that we can be certain of the sound? Or you said it's a little bit muddied. Something was lost in the translation?
Oh, no. I mean that we can muddy the sounds. We can muddy the purity of the sounds we speak. But Sanskrit actually hasn't changed. Every other language has. But Sanskrit doesn't change, and it can't. Really, it's the most beautiful order. There's a very precise way that you're given to pronounce everything. And just a wonderful, beautiful order. So that anyone, anywhere, can pronounce these sounds. Because they correspond to the human organ, so that, well, for instance, if you open your mouth, they're there are 5 orders of sound, 5 places in the mouth from which you can speak these sounds. There's the throat, the soft palate, the hard palate, the teeth, and the lips. So there's a vowel sound for each of those, and from that vowel sound a stream of consonant sounds. And they just have to happen. If you pronounce them, if you use that part of the mouth, you just
What are
have
some
to.
examples? Could you give us some examples
Yes.
of some vowel sounds in Sanskrit?
Well, I'll let you make the first one, for instance. So if you just open your mouth, open your throat, and just have your mouth perfectly relaxed, like a sort of an idiot, just let your mouth fall open, and then just sing the sound that comes out. Yes, ah. But you had your tongue up a bit, so it was a bit.
Yeah.
But if your mouth's open, there's nothing impeding the sound. It just must be ah. And everybody, anywhere, wherever they are in the world, if they just do that, open their mouth, let the sound out, that first vowel sound, which is the very first sound, must be ah. And from that, there are consonants, and we could go through every vowel and every consonant, and you could make them. It'd take a little time to get them exactly right, probably, but they have to happen. If you put your tongue in that place and you concentrate on that place, it has to happen, just like the ah.
Are our vowel sounds the basics ah, e, o, u?
Yes, exactly.
Are there other vowel sounds in
Yes,
Sanskrit?
there are. There's R, E, A, O, U, and then there's ri and ri, which don't sound to us like vowel sounds, but in fact they are, because there is no actual contact of the tongue. It's simply a sound that comes through, and there's no contact of the tongue with any part of the mouth. They just sound by themselves, because that's the definition of a vowel, that it sounds by itself. And there are the pure vowels, and there are the diphthongs, and there are the semi-vowels. But there are R, E, and U. Those are the 3 basic ones, and from those, the diphthongs arise.
What is sounding?
Sounding is just simply sounding out the vowel sounds, sounding out sounds, sounding the sound of the human voice.
Do these vowel sounds have different qualities?
Oh, very, very different, yes. And, well, they're actually the fabric of creation itself. So they're always sounding in different measures in all of us and in everything, because, well, we're spoken into existence, and we're just made up of the vowel sounds, well, of all the sounds. And they have a different effect upon us.
Okay, let's talk about a negative and a positive effect if we can. And you made reference to it earlier, that we should be somewhat cognizant and careful about the sounds that we make, so that we don't send the wrong sounds out into the universe to be bouncing around forever. But what it would be considered a very positive sound if we wanted to create something today?
Well, one that's listened to. It's the listening that purifies sound. There aren't really right and wrong sounds, and as you listen, for instance, if you were just singing yes, that's not in any particular place. But if you sing ah, that's very clear, and it actually comes from the heart and it goes to the heart. And sorry, what was your question? I've forgotten.
Well, I'm wondering if there are qualities associated with various sounds, whether we can put some kind of an emotional value on those, or some outside judgmental experience that we can bring to it, so that there is such a thing as a negative sound or a positive sound, or they're just blah sounds and pure sounds.
Well, I think what makes a sound a useful sound for creation is a conscious sound, which is really what I said is a listened to sound. And the unconscious one sounds that if the person who's speaking is someone who's ignoring the truth in any way, at any moment, and is unaware of themselves. I know that our consciousness shifts all the time, but the more aware we are of ourselves and the more pointed towards the truth we are, and I know when I'm saying that the truth is different for lots of us, but it can't be really different. It must be just one truth. But if we're sincerely pointed in the way of the truth, then, and that's somewhere in our being when we speak, it's in our sound, and that sound is a useful sound for people to hear.
Can we tell as listeners the difference between the truth and a lie?
Of course. You have to listen, though. You can tell, if you listen to anybody, they reveal themselves to you. And it's usually perfectly easy to know whether someone is sincere, whether they're speaking from their heart, whether they're speaking a load of theory, which they don't believe in, or simply a load of theory, or whether they're trying to deceive themselves or you, whether they're in fact full of hatred or full of jealousy, or whether they're bored. We can tell all that.
History is full of recorded instances, though, where individuals and large groups of people have been fooled by leaders that have taken them down the primrose path to uncertainty. We think of the Third Reich and a number of other empires throughout the world.
Yes. Well, in fact, Hitler knew Sanskrit. He knew the power of sound. You can mislead people with the power of sound, and I very often heard it. If you can use anything. If you've got a sharp knife, you can use it for what it's meant to be used for, or you can use it to kill somebody. Sound is the most powerful instrument we have, and so of course it can be used by people who understand it, and by people who are people of vision. Power corrupts them quite often. Well, we know it does. Then sound can be used. Obviously, it can be used for the wrong ends, for evil.
What about healing sounds? What are they?
I think healing sounds are just sounds that make people more whole, because health is to do with wholeness. And they're sounds which bring a person together. It's just, they draw a person's pattern together. Sometimes we get terribly dissipated in all sorts of directions, and clear, pure sound, like simply a reassuring word from someone who loves you, that just brings a person into line again. And the same, it can be in that form, or it can be in the form of singing or beautiful music, real music, a music that has been composed and played by someone who remembers themselves, remembers what they're here for, or is trying to remember it.
Are there special sounds in the phrase "I love you"?
Well, I suppose it's how it's spoken, because it's not spoken in the universal language, but that's the emotional content it has content it has when it's actually spoken. Because you could say "I love you" and not mean it, but if you say it from your heart, then it must go to the heart of the other person.
But the sounds themselves have no significance. It's more the meaning that we ascribe to those sounds.
That's interesting. Again, I think it's really whether you acknowledge those sounds, because of course there's a certain power in the word "I", and there's great power in the sound "love", because we understand what it means. But And there's great power in the word you, because you've got the oo sound. But in English, not all the words sound the same as they mean. That's the wonderful thing about Sanskrit. It actually means what it says. It does. The meaning and the sound are one. So every word is effective, even if we don't know what it means. So that's why people chant a lot, and the chanting is magic. It's because it means what it does. It does what it means. But there are some things in every language, great poetry, and words that are spoken with utter conviction by someone of a great stature, of a great being, then those words have got that same sound. The sound and the meaning are the same. If you get a very high being speaking anywhere, there's something about their voice, something about the way they put the words together. It just goes straight to the heart, and it raises whoever hears it.
There's a quotation from Plato: "When the sound of the music changes, the walls of the city shake." What does that mean?
Well, it just means that I'm putting it in a different way, if you change the music of a society, then that society either goes up or down. It goes nearer to the truth or farther away from it. And you can see what's happening with the sort of music that we surround or bombard ourselves with today. It's shattering music to the soul, absolutely shattering. And you can see the evidence of it in our violent and unhappy states of society. And that's to do with the music. I think Plato's absolutely right.
Could you lead us in a short exercise in the use of sound in a positive, healing, solidifying manner?
Well, yes. Perhaps what you have to do really is make sure that your posture is that you're erect, that your feet are on the ground, that you're in contact with the earth, that you're really aware of your body sitting on the chair. And then just be aware of the whole body. Just know that you're an instrument. The sound is going to flow through you. It doesn't come from you. It comes through you. And then breathe deeply and make sure that you're filling up your tummy, not your chest. And take some deep breaths in, filling up the tummy, and then let all that air out. Do that 2 or 3 times, making sure that the tummy is really filled up with air. And then the next time you breathe out, just open the mouth as we did before, and just let the sound of ah out on that breath right to the very end. And then hold the breath for a moment. Breathe in, filling up the tummy. And then again let that sound out. And be sure that when you're sounding, when that sound is coming out, that you listen to the very center of that sound. Listen with both ears to the very, very center.